BP added more than $70 billion to the U.S. economy last year by making investments from coast to coast. Investments like acquiring America's largest biogas producer, Archaea Energy, and starting up new infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
The stress and crowds of holiday shopping can put a damper on your holiday spirit, and you don't always find all the perfect gifts you're looking for. The Virginia Lottery's games make easy and tremendously fun gifts for all the adults in your life, even you. Spruce up your gift-giving game this holiday season with the Virginia Lottery. The Virginia Lottery's holiday scratchers are a gift any adult will love. Treat yourself to some winter wonderment and play the lottery's holiday online instant games from anywhere in Virginia. Visit valottery.com/holiday. Please gift responsibly. Lottery games are not for minors. Have you heard? You can listen to your gripping investigations ad-free. Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. That's amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. And catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
It feels like all of us who are following the Delphi murders have gotten a crash course in Odinism in the past few days.
A central thesis of a recent defense memorandum filed in the case is that, quote, members of a pagan Norse religion called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abigail Williams and Liberty German.
The thing is, we don't know anything about this subject, and we feel uncomfortable making a lot of assumptions about this faith and its various nuances. So we were thrilled when we heard from members of The Troth that they would be willing to talk with us. The Troth has been around for 35 years. It's an educational and service organization for people who practice pre-Christian Germanic faiths. They practice an inclusive form of heathenry, meaning people of all races and backgrounds and sexualities and gender expressions are welcome to join.
On September 18th of this year, they put out a full statement addressing the defense's memorandum in the Delphi case. We will link to that in our show notes. We were fortunate enough to speak with 2 leaders from The Troth, Lauren Crow and Jo Hunding.
Lauren is the president and CEO of The Troth. She's also co-host of the Heathen History Podcast and has been featured on Harvard Divinity School's Ministry of Ideas podcast.
Jo is the director of The Troth's In-Reach Prison Services. She has years of experience in corrections and mental health. Part of her job involves trying to counter the exclusive form of the religion put forward by white nationalist prison gangs.
Lauren and Jo will speak about the differences between terms like heathen, asatru, and Odinist. They'll talk about white nationalist prison gangs and how they operate. They'll even talk about In Odin We Trust patches. Lauren and Jo will speak about the history of this faith and point out where they felt the defense's memorandum painted members of their inclusive faith with a rather broad brush.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, a conversation about Odinism, prison gangs, and human sacrifice with The Troth.
Lauren and Jo, first starting with Lauren, can you tell us a bit about your background and what we're going to talk about today, the organization and everything like that?
Absolutely. My name is Lauren Crow. I am the president and CEO of The Troth, and The Troth is an international heathen organization. We're the largest and the oldest, established in 1987. And what we do is we're an educational nonprofit who tries to train leaders and help people build local faith communities, as well as we publish a lot of books and materials from an inclusive standpoint. And what inclusive means is that we believe that everyone, no matter their race, ethnicity, gender, family status, ability, none of, sexuality, gender expression, any of that matters to who the gods call. We don't believe that we have the hubris to tell the gods who they should call. And as a result, our organization, we consider ourselves anti-racist, pro-queer, and we work with organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ADL to help kind of fight back the white supremacist strain of our religion. I also host a podcast called Heathen History, where we dive into the history of our religion, the good, the bad, and the really bizarre, because there's a lot of that because history's weird. In addition, I'm a subject matter expert for Harvard Divinity School, and I have been featured on their podcast about Odinism and the history of modern heathenry, which heathen, to give you guys an idea, is just kind of the blanket word for all of the various related faiths under kind of a Germanic pagan umbrella. So heathen is like saying Christian. I think it's the best way to relate the two together. And that's who I am.
I'm Jo Hunding. I've been a member of The Troth since 2006, so a year or two. I was in corrections for over 24 years, and while in corrections, I dealt with the Odinists, the white supremacists, the gangs, the whole 9 yards. I was 4 years as a correctional officer, and then I was in counseling for the rest of the time, and I was promoted all the way to deputy warden, where I really had to deal with a lot of what was going on and with the, especially the gangs. I was part of the 2 different facilities I was at. I was on their gang task force as a member. I just am boondoggled by some of the stuff that I was reading in the memorandum. So from there, let's go on.
Well, first, I do want to also brag on Jo. Jo's also the director of our InReach Prison Services, which is our program to help fight these gangs and white supremacy in prisons. Pretty much every prisoner that writes to our organization, we work with over 100 facilities right now, and a huge growing network of chaplains. Jo answers almost every letter. Jo corresponds with these people and keeps records, and Jo is phenomenal. So I want to brag on her for a minute. She undersells herself, and she's truly just an amazing part of our organization.
And yes, I do undersell myself sometimes. Like I said, I was with the corrections for so long. And now with InReach, I see the letters, and I remember talking with the inmates on my caseload and the inmates that I see now. And I'll get letters from, first-time letters from an inmate saying, well, I'm an Odinist, but I believe in inclusivity. Well, that's kind of, mutually exclusive. You can't have both. And there are 2 mission statements from The Troth. One is about, we welcome anybody of any flavor, basically, to, if they're interested in heathenry, to, keep writing to us, and we'll pass on what we can, guide them as we can. And the second one is that we do not discriminate against, and we do not allow any type of the racism, homophobia, all the isms. And I put those 2 on every single letter that goes back to every single inmate. And sometimes I get responses and sometimes I don't. So I know which ones were the true Odinists, which to me, after, years in the prison system and now several years dealing with InReach program, they're white supremacists. That's my bottom line. I understand the ideology and I understand where they're coming from, and we are not what they want. They want something, way more exclusive. They want to be just for them, just a little bit. And what really bothers me the most is with the lawyers pointing out Odinist this, Odinist that. And I made a note of it in some notes I took, was one thing they call us is that it is an organized pagan cult. Now, I have an issue with that. That is my, and it angers me that would happen, because heathenry as a whole, we don't try to bring anybody into heathenry. If they show an interest, we share. We don't go out and say, this is what we are. Odinists do. They recruit, and they love recruiting in the prisons, as Lauren will get into, I'm sure. But they use, well, we can protect you. For the new guys who have never been in prison before, they come in, they're scared. I worked in nothing but male close security facilities, and it is scary. It really is. What used to crack me up is they told me I was the most intimidating person they'd ever met. I'm 4'8", and I've seen 6-footers walk away from me, going, "Okay, Ms. Hunding, we'll do what you say." I just don't put up with any foolishness. But for these guys to come in and say, "Well, we'll protect you from this," and ostensibly they say, "Well, we'll protect you while you're in jail from this gang and that gang and that gang," but that's not what they're doing. They're actually recruiting them for life. And that is what I, in my InReach program, am trying to stop from happening.
As people with the Troth, and this is your faith, what has it felt like to see some of these concepts get dragged into this light with the memorandum, and talk through that experience before we sort of get into some of the specifics there?
How this has made me feel. So I grew up in East Arkansas, just outside of West Memphis. So that should give you an idea how I'm feeling right now. As a weird kid in the 90s, I mean, right now I'm really struggling. I'm not gonna lie, I'm struggling. I wish that this was not happening, because after reading the documents, there's so much conflation between what is essentially a very small racist sub. This is like taking the Westboro Baptist Church and trying to paint every Baptist as a member of the Westboro Baptist Church, or taking the FLDS and trying to paint every Mormon as a polygamist who abuses children. It hurts. I'm not going to lie. It's painful, and it's caused a lot of anxiety for our members. We have members who've wondered, am I safe to wear necklaces or signs of my faith anymore? Are people going to believe that I'm potentially could commit? I mean, I can't believe in 2023, I have to come out and say, we don't practice human sacrifice, nor have we, and no one has in thousands of years. I can't believe I have to say this in the year, in 2023. But that's kind of where I am. It's shocking, and it feels history does not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And that's how I'm feeling right now.
I'm right there with her.
Absolutely. And I want to go into this, and I think this will help. I mean, I love, Lauren, what you said about, it's like talking about Christianity, right? I'm a Roman Catholic. Kevin was raised Baptist. There's a lot of variety, right, about different faiths within one overarching faith. And it would be silly to be conflating those two groups, because there's a lot of differences, even if there's some similarities. And based on that, I guess, what can we talk about some of the differences between, say, the Troth and something like Odinism, and what's the sort of overarching umbrella there, but what are some important differences to point out between some of the things that maybe are getting conflated here in this discussion around this one crime?
Now, I'm going to focus right now specifically on North American definitions, because I want to caveat this. If you're listening in Europe, these are different, and it's a linguistic issue mostly. So I do want to couch that by saying that this is strictly a North American definition of these groups. So you have heathenry. Heathenry is, like I said, the overarching thing. And when we say Germanic paganism, we're not talking about Germany. We're talking about Germanic languages. So your Scandinavian languages are Germanic, German, of course, but English is a Germanic language. There are a lot of languages that kind of fall into that. So when sociologists talk about these pagan groups, they tend to group them by languages, because it tends to be that you see these groups have a lot of commonalities due to a shared language, or shared language families, because they tend to come from the same place. And with that, with Under the Troth, we have people that practice Anglo-Saxon or Old English paganism. We have people who practice, what you would think of as like Scandinavian, kind of the typical Norse stuff, Icelandic. We have people who practice all the different tribes that existed in, the Franks, the Alemannics, the Goths, all those different tribes that existed in Germany. You have people who kind of have a religion that is somewhere between Roman and German, because there was so much overlap due to Romans basically coming in and taking over those areas, that you see those gods overlap. And the fact of the matter is, there was no singular paganism that ever ran through Europe. Everything, we're talking about faiths that spanned thousands of miles over thousands of years. You cannot nail it down and say there was one singular belief. But generally, what heathens believe is we are a community-focused religion. We worship the gods of those people. We believe very much in things like community and hospitality. Those are huge in our we believe in reciprocity. So, for instance, we are very big on making sure that we are not only generous, but we repay generosity others give us. And generosity is another huge thing. There was and I apologize that I can't remember the exact one, but there was a saga in the Old Norse Eddas where one of the best compliments that you could give a king was he hated gold. And that's because he was generous. And to me, those are the things that we really value. We value family, but not family of birth. We value creating communities. And that's one of the things the Troth does, is we try to help people through our program. We have a program called Stewards. And each steward has a geographic area they're kind of responsible for getting to know the local heathens in. And then we help people find each other. It's kind of like heathen matchmaking. And with the hope that they will then be able to build their own local strong communities. I've been a part of a kindred here in where I live in Arkansas for 20 years. We've had you would think Arkansas, y'all have a pagan group, but we've had a thriving group in Arkansas for 20 years, thanks to the Troth. That's how that happened, because the stewards were able, the steward at the time is my now kindred brother. And so we really try to do that, as well as do a lot of interfaith work, working with other groups that share our values to help protect the rights of people who are marginalized, because as pagans, we understand that, and we want to make sure that everyone has the right to live a safe, healthy, happy life everywhere, because that's, once again, also kind of part of our faith.
At the Murder Sheet, we spend so much time digging into crime stories that sometimes it's difficult to find the time to plan out and cook elaborate, nutritious meals. That's why we are so excited about our sponsor, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Our sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you go to factormeals.com/msheet and use our special code MSHEET, you're not just getting half off this high-quality meal plan. You're supporting us too.
So I'm obsessed with Factor. I had their creamed corn chicken and their tomato basil chicken risotto recently. Both were delicious. That risotto in particular was amazing. Plus, the whole process was a breeze. All I had to do was pop the meal into the microwave. The food was tasty and flavorful, which is no surprise given that each recipe is specifically crafted by chefs and approved by dietitians.
Having Factor during the hectic holiday season has been a boon, especially with us pumping out so many episodes. Head to factormeals.com/msheet and use code MSHEET to get 50% off. That's code MSHEET at factormeals.com/msheet to get 50% off.
Hey listeners, this is Candace DeLong, the host of Killer Psyche. Imagine all your audio entertainment available in just one place. That's what the Audible app is all about. With Audible, you can always find the best of what you love or discover something new. Audible has an incredible selection of mystery and thriller titles and originals like Something Ain't Right by Roger and Zachary Stringer, The Space Within by Greg O'Connor and Josh Fagan, and Moriarty, an Audible original. Membership includes access to Audible originals, podcasts, and tons of audiobooks that you can download or stream as much as you want. And as an Audible member, you can choose one title per month from an ever-growing catalog of titles to keep. The Audible app makes it easy to listen anytime, anywhere, whether you're traveling, working out, doing chores, wherever your day takes you. New members can try Audible now for free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/DLong or text DLong to 500-500.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. You can turn $10 into $250. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/fan and use code FAN. That's code FAN at prizepicks.com/fan.
Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
Now we start getting into the nitty-gritties. In North America, now I'm not speaking for Europe because in Europe it's completely different. Heathenry and asatru in Europe can kind of be synonyms, whereas in North America and Canada, it is not true. Asatru tends to be a folkish religion. Now, the term folkish comes from the German Volkisch. This was a movement that started in the Victorian era in the confederated areas of Germany that weren't unified yet because German unification didn't happen until later. And these were people who saw the old ways and believed, because there was a lot of anti-Semitism at the time, Christianity was a Jewish religion, therefore we need to find the faith of our ancestors. Primarily, this movement was led by a man named Guido von List, who was a con man, who was not royal, contrary to the name he tried to adopt. His father was a publisher, and so because of that, he was able to publish a lot of anti-Semitic and versions of kind of Norse mythology. He also thought everything that he saw in the Austrian countryside was an old pagan temple. He is actually responsible for the tie of the runes, which are an alphabet. Like, they're an alphabet. It's like letters into being something mystical and magical, and actually making up these meanings that you see a lot of these racist groups attribute to them. So we go now, fast forward into the 60s and 70s, and this is when you start actually seeing these religions kind of congeal in the US and Europe. But specifically, we're going to focus on the US. You have a woman named Elsa Christensen, and she is probably the most important historical figure to talk about here. Elsa Christensen is a Nazi. Like, she was a member of the Nazi Party in Denmark. Elsa Christensen moves to Canada and then eventually to Florida. Now, she starts a group called the Odinist Fellowship. You see where I'm going with this now. And the Odinist Fellowship was a racist group. I've read everything they ever published. They have pretty much gone defunct. They maybe have 50 members after she passed. So Christensen's journals that she put together were not very religious in nature. They were often her just raging about minorities, immigration, which was funny because she immigrated, and other things like that. So Christensen, however, started the first Odinist prison ministry. And Odinism became not so much a religion as much as it's a politico-religion. And most of their meetings, and I'm quoting directly from her interview with a magazine called Vort True from 1993. It was a profile done by her by a man named Valgard Murray, who formed another racist asatru organization called the Asatru Alliance. Basically, they used that time not to study their religion or develop their spirituality, but to discuss politics and to do basically gang-style organizing under the guise of religion. And today, that's what Odinism really has become, especially in the prisons. It is a way to organize into a gang with religious cover. Now, asatru is in the middle. I kind of got off on a tangent, but they are folkish. What folkish means and what it comes down to is Volkish. What folkish means is that you should only worship the gods of your ancestors. And more specifically, if you are only white people can worship the gods. Now, that's kind of their soft belief there, but they're racist. They are anti-Semitic. They believe in traditional gender roles. They are anti-LGBT. However, for the most part, they're not a gang. They're not violent. They're no different to me than a lot of very conservative fundamentalist Christian churches. I mean, you will find that in half the churches where I live. While I disagree with them, there's nothing, I can't say someone who's also true. To me, no, I'm not going to hang out with them, but I would never say, oh, that person, oh God, avoid that person. They're going to hurt you. Any more than I would say, avoid the preacher of XXY church. They're going to hurt you because they believe, gay people are going to hell. It's a very similar, I would like, they're basically the heathen version of fundamentalist Christians. Odinists, like I said, so you have Odinists on the very far right hand of the spectrum. You have the Asatru that are right, but not that far right. And then you kind of have the rest of us. Most people are going to fall somewhere in that heathenry sphere. They're going to call themselves, heathens, foreign sed, which is just Scandinavian for the old ways, pagan, something like that, people that identify. And so Asatru, because, and pretty much if you run into an organization in the US that calls itself Asatru, you're running into an organization that considers itself folkish, it considers itself racist. Now, that's like I said, I want to caveat that. I have very good friends that are part of the Asatru Fellowship in the UK. There is, of course, the very large Asatru group in Iceland, and they are inclusive groups. They are wonderful people, and they are my friends. Even in South America, you have Asatru groups in Mexico and South America and Central America. They are all wonderful people. I'm strictly speaking about the US and Canada, where we have a very specific vein of racism that comes from these people who come out of the Elsa Christensen influence onto our community in the 70s.
That is so interesting. And I really appreciate all that clarification, because I feel like people are not necessarily getting that. And it sounds to me, as an outsider, and clarify, please feel free to correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but a big difference is the inclusivists versus the folkish. And that is kind of where you see not racist, actually anti-racist versus racist. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that it's absolutely fair to say it's the difference between a group that dictates who can worship the gods versus a group who is open and saying, we welcome everyone. And the other thing is, of course, the more folkish groups like the Odinists do try to recruit, whereas I've often said that we're a religion of attraction. We talk to the people that are attracted to us, what we do and what we believe. I have never knocked on a door and said, hello, would you like to hear the good news of Odin? Although it would be kind of funny to do that to one of my heathen friends. But however, with the other groups, they are very aggressive and trying to recruit, especially trying to recruit people that share their values. Whereas we are like, hey, we're over here having fun. You're welcome to join us if you'd like.
And it sounds like that's where some of this prison recruitment can sort of come in. You mentioned before the fear that comes with going to prison and feeling like, I need to have people who have my back in here. And Jo, I'm wondering if you can speak to that from your experience and how that can play out.
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, I can start out with, I found a quote by a guy named Will Carlos back in 2017. He said basically, when you enter the prison system, you're stripped by the prison system of any sense of worth or ability to contribute meaningfully to society. And that is what going to prison is for a lot of people, is they failed as a human being. They failed this. They failed the family. They failed the community. They feel nothing but failure. In my home state, what we've done is instituted a program. It's called What Works. It's what deals with the mental health issues. It deals with your educational issues. It deals with getting meaningful skills so that when you go back out, you've got a skill to take with you. We also deal with what we start here in this state is the minute you are convicted, a probation officer will start you getting all this information, and that goes to the prison where you go to. And the whole time that this person is in prison, they're building and building and building. They're getting outside support networks. They're getting outside this, outside that. so that when they do get ready to be released, they've got, they've got an education, they've got a skill, they've had whatever mental health or regular counseling they needed. They've got a support group ready for them when they get out. My state's the leading one throughout the entire United States. But we have other states coming to, I'll let out, Georgia. Hello. When I first started in corrections and counseling, we were teaching a substance abuse course, which really technically taught drug addicts how to be better addicts, which is really wrong. What works teaches them not, this is what this drug does. This is what they teach. This is why you possibly use it. This is, you look for your triggers, look for why you use it. What underlying problem are you trying to medicate? And we go through the whole 9 yards with that. But what I saw is we had several gangs, because being part of the task force, I'm originally I'm from Chicago. I'm from the South Side. So hello, you name gangs, I can name them for you. I come from Al Capone land, and when I got into the system, I'm like, yeah, okay, I recognize what he is. I recognize because each gang has a specific symbolism that they either wear, or like Bloods and Crips have the blue and the red handkerchiefs they hang out in their back pockets, so you can tell, so somebody else can tell which side you're on. Odinists, every single one of them is going to be wearing a Thor's hammer somewhere. They either have a tattoo, they're actually wearing the hammer if the system allows it. Most prison systems don't allow that kind of jewelry, or they have the symbols. They love the tattoos. They have all sorts of weird things tattooed on them. You'll have one person that they all kind of gravitate towards, and even if he's not in the same dormitory as other guys, he has somebody in each dormitory looking for the new guys coming in who are scared, feeling like they were railroaded, they hate this. And especially down here in Georgia, a lot of our system, they see a lot of the, not a lot, it's about 50-50. Judges are black just as much as we have white judges. But if they were sentenced by a black judge, it's because of my color. It's because of my color. I hear that constantly, or heard that constantly. They recruit from the day the guy gets there, and they are trying to bring him in under the auspices of, well, this religion is for you. You're white. We're going to do this. Some of the gangs are called, like, there's the SOBs. They wear lightning bolts tattooed on their necks, like the SS did. And then there's there's the ghost, White Ghost Face. That's a gang. Of course, the Aryan Nation, we've got them. They're very strong, and all that's nationwide. And the thing is they can communicate from one facility to another, from one state to another. They're not supposed to be allowed to do it, but what they do is they get somebody on the outside, get the letter, write the letter, put in a few code words, send it off to another one, and that person who receives it knows who it's coming from. We picked up on that probably, let's see, I retired in 2014, and we had picked up on that probably in 2000, when we first started seeing a lot more and more use of runes as means of communication, which irritated the bejeebers out of me, because that's from my religion and you guys are doing this. But they do recruit, and they figure they don't care about the other guys. If they follow a pretend heathenry type or a also true type rituals, because they're always pushing to have, well, we need to have sacred space. We need to have something that's all by ourselves. That's so they can meet and they can do their own meetings. Or they want to start pushing for, well, it says in the lore that we have to have beards. In the prison systems that I deal with most of the time, you got to be clean shaven. And I not only deal with the state prison systems, I'm getting letters from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I'm getting letters from federal prisoners too. And I'm hearing the same thing from them. It's not just state problem, it's federal problem too. They push to have changes so that it makes it easier for them to get their agenda across. And when I get a letter from an inmate, and he says, well, I'm an Odinist, but I want to be inclusive. I don't want to be part of that gang stuff. And I'm like, okay, you're not an Odinist, really. The other side, and I was talking with one of the Troth members, and they kind of laughed at me. What I explained to him is, to me, someone who is an Odinist, and I'm using it strictly in the religious context, is someone who is dedicating themselves to Odin. And he's a hard taskmaster. But, like Oren said, what we see as Odinist throughout the system is actually, it's just religious cover for white supremacy. And that's a constant through, no matter where I've seen it. Like I said, if I put those 2 paragraphs at the bottom of the letter and I never get a call back from them, and they had told me, "Oh, I'm an Odinist," yeah, they are. And they were just, what they're trying to do is to get an outside organization, the Troth, to back them in getting what they want. And I've been around too long. I don't trust inmates. I take them with a grain of salt. If they show me that there is a genuine interest, the correspondence will continue on. If I write them that first letter and they get that and they never hear it again, oh well, I already know where they're coming from. That's really why I do what I do, is because I saw so many young men being, I won't say sucked in, but think of a fish being drugged in. They got caught and getting more and more in trouble. And the problem with that is that means they also going to have trouble while they're inside the facilities, not just with what they did outside. They start getting into trouble. They get in trouble, break rules, and they get put in segregation. It's a downward spiral. And the higher ups in the Odinist hierarchy don't care. They just want more recruits, more people. I look at them as cannon fodder, basically. So yeah, we have that issue.
Another part of that is there are organizations that are Odinist that are outside that have been actively doing prison work. And they give the legitimate cover. They bring in these ministers who give them the legitimate cover to this organizing, because, if you say, I'm going to meet with a minister, most people are not going to think that is a cover for some sort of activity. But the fact of the matter is, in many cases, not only is it a cover, it's intentionally planned that way because these organizations are funded and backed by this kind of thing.
And following along that, they use the word minister, and they actually go into a facility wearing a clerical collar. And what they've done is they've had to do, when they do their volunteer certification, they're not completely honest. Go figure. What are the odds? And that's how they get in. And as Lauren said, it is just a cover of pretending that they're coming in for spiritual help. And no, they're not.
Wow. And I love, Jo, what you said about, you're kind of trying to give some of these people a lifeline, if maybe they can explore their faith in a more inclusive and,
absolutely.
But at the same time, safeguard the Troth, because you don't want to be used to do anything that would be just furthering whatever the white supremacist interest is in that situation. One thing I want to go to, and I feel like I have to ask this because of the context of why we're talking, but also I feel really stupid asking it, because if there's a Christian murderer who kills somebody, nobody's sitting around being like, is this what the Christians are all about? Like killing kids, even though I'm sure we can all identify a lot more murderers who were raised Christian or even practicing Christians off the top of our heads than we can anybody affiliated with kind of more heathenry or Odinism or whatever we want to call it. But the thing about this memorandum is it sort of linked child sacrifice and human sacrifice with these beliefs in a way that kind of didn't really interrogate it, just more of like talked about it as like these murders were a religious sacrifice or a ritual or whatnot. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that topic, and maybe we can kind of debunk some things or talk about that.
Yeah, first of all, I can't, once again, as I said in the beginning, in the year 2023, I can't believe I'm having to say we do not support anything involving the murder of anyone, right? Like at all, period. Full stop. That was kind of the statement we put out this week from our organization was we don't, I don't know how I can say that any stronger. And also to that, I'm going to add that, having been a part of this organization and being a historian of this religion, there has been one murder tied to Odinism. And it wasn't even in the United States. And it was a person killing, and it was a man named Varg Vargness. He is a very famous black metal musician, and he killed his bandmate. And that was not a religious murder. It was just Varg Vargness killed his bandmate. It had very little to do with, like I said, had very little to do with his religion and more to do with he's just an awful dude.
Yeah.
So, but part of this thing, like they went through and they talked about what these things are. And they did quote the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, I mean, kudos for them to at least trying a little bit. But, and the Southern Poverty Law Center's definitions are great. But like some of the stuff that like, first of all, they used the term Odinite, which all of us just went, what is an Odinite? Because Odinite is a mineral. It's related to serpentine. It's a greenish mineral. It comes from marine life-rich areas. Like, that's how it forms. That's what Odinite is. I don't know what these guys were talking about, but just to clear that up, that's what an Odinite is. And I went and I spoke with a friend of mine who's in the Pagan Police Association of the UK. I spoke to some heathens in Germany, all over Europe, trying to get like, am I missing context? Is this something used in Europe? And I just don't know it. No one has heard of this term except those of us who are rock nerds. So Odinite is not a thing for us. But they talked about human sacrifice. First of all, they misrepresented a really great paper in this thing. Like the things they tried to say are not true. They misrepresented his paper. Second, they went into detail, and I don't really want to bring up the actual discussions about how things were found. I've read it a couple of times. That's really enough for anyone. But they keep going into the paintings and the sacrifice. And I feel like they didn't take the 5 seconds to read the Wikipedia summary of Odin hanging on the tree. Because if they had taken the 5 seconds to read the summary or taken the 10 minutes to read that part of the Poetic Edda, they would know that that is about self-sacrifice. Odin sacrificed his eye and his 9 days and his comfort to gain the wisdom to learn how to write. Because at the time, the belief was, this was an illiterate society that had no written language. And Odin sacrificed himself to bring them a written language. So when they talk about in all these documents about the painting that was done by the man who is Asatru. By the way, it says in the documents that he's Asatru, but they're trying to conflate Asatru and Odinist into one thing. Right. When they say that, these paintings. So first of all, as I've said before, the painting of Odin on the tree with the Fehu rune, which is the F rune they're saying was out there. That's the first letter of the alphabet. That's like if you did a painting of the man who brought language to humans of English, and you painted an A on it, because that's the first letter of the alphabet. First letter of the runic alphabet is Fehu. So second, I genuinely believe, especially with men of a certain age, Odin hanging from the tree is like my first heathen painting. I've seen a dozen variants in a dozen homes done by a dozen different people, good and bad. And the fact of the matter is, it's a motif of trying to gain wisdom. To me, it's like, when I was going through school to become a computer programmer, I thought a lot about Odin because you can't just wake up one morning and decide, hey, I'd like to be a computer programmer. You have to study and learn and work and sacrifice your time and comfort to learn a skill. And that's what that motif is about. And yet they're trying to make it into this nefarious thing that is evil. And so many things, they tried to conflate Odinists with Satan worshipers. First of all, we don't believe in Satan. So it's really hard to worship the devil when you don't believe in the devil. Two, once again, it's trying to incite the ideas that we saw back in the 80s and 90s of the satanic panic. I feel very fortunate that most of the people that I've spoken to aren't really buying into it. At least most of the people in like true crime and those worlds don't seem to be buying into it. But a lot of people are just full bore acting like this is the absolute truth. And Odinist, I had somebody ask me about it at work this week because they know I'm very open about who I am and what I believe. And they asked me about it, not because they thought we were involved, but they're like, what is wrong with these defense attorneys? But it's definitely a thing where, it's hard to look at all of this information, and it's horrible information, but at the same time, see all these glaring mistakes and take it seriously. Because I feel like they didn't, I'm going to be honest, the thing that bothers me the most is there are academics on this subject. Jennifer Snook, Jefferson Calico are two people who've done in-depth studies on these populations. There is Ben Wagner and myself, Ben Wagner published a complete history of our religion. There are academics who absolutely the defense could have consulted with, so they at least weren't getting this so wrong. And now people who've never heard of my faith, who their only understanding of Thor was either high school mythology or Marvel movies, are going to see this, and now their thoughts are going to be, is this person a murderer? Is this person a racist? And it's terrifying. And I've read through all these things, and one thing that also, if they even taken time to speak to someone in this religion would know, trying to get an Odinist cult together would be really hard. Or an Asatru or a heathen cult, because we can't agree on anything. We can't even agree on a complete definition of our religion. We can't agree on much. You put 3 heathens in a room, you'll get 12 answers. Mm-hmm. So our organization, even we elect a new president every 3 years because we think leadership is like fish. It starts to stink after a while. So I really feel like this document is just so riddled with errors about this. And then the patches, they're trying to say that it's a gang, a gang symbol, but they don't even name what this is called. It's called a Volknot. It is an interlocking symbol of triangles. It is associated with Odin, but it's also associated with warriors. You see a lot of veterans that wear it. People who work in the military, police. It is very much tied to the warrior aspect of our religion, which is very strong on all aspects. And so, I have one hanging on my wall behind me with ravens on it. It's right here. You can see you can see it. And I am by far not, what they are accusing these people to be. So to say their only real evidence that they want to try to put out there is that we're wearing a symbol that is not only common among heathens, but other Wiccans and other pagans who might have an affinity for Norse mythology wearing these. You see it in Scandinavia sometimes with just dudes who served in the military who are atheists. There are some gang affiliations with it, but there are gang affiliations wearing a crucifix in some gangs. And so to me, it's like they're trying to paint. Yeah, it's like trying to say, well, clearly all of these guards who may or may not worship these gods at all, they may or may not have these patches. We don't know. These guards, it would be like saying, oh, well, all of these guards are Catholic. So clearly there's a Catholic cult going on. I would like them to please just come sit on one meeting of our board of directors and see how hard it is to get everyone to agree. And they will real quickly realize how hard a cult would be to perform. Because we are all a bunch of strong-headed people who like to be very assertive in our beliefs.
What you said about the history and in heathenry, there's all these different tribes to draw from. There's all these different traditions to draw from. So it's not like one for one, we all have the same thing and it's cookie cutter. It's something that it sounds like people can kind of cultivate their own interests and directions they want to go in. So, and even the disparate in more of the kind of white supremacy crew, it sounds like that's all over the place, for sure. I'm curious. I want to delve into the patches. I'm so glad you brought that up. And the patches that we've heard about mentioned that symbol that I'm going to butcher. So I'm the triangles. How do you say that again?
I will. Volknot. Yes.
Volknot. So the Volknot, and I believe there was one in Odin we trust. Right, Kevin? Am I right about that?
Yeah. And I've seen pictures of both of them.
Yes.
So yeah, I've seen, and you know how many backpacks I've seen that on, or jackets, or at various pagan events I've been to.
Right.
The patches are available on Etsy. That's where they're getting them from. And I can speak about the patches. And I looked up, I've still got access to the SOPs and stuff like that with my department. And basically, my department says if it's not authorized, it better not be on your uniform. And they don't allow it. Well, guess what? I got into Indiana's SOPs on uniforms. And basically what they said was all uniforms shall be in accordance with, I read this, specific establishment for the Department of Uniforms and approved by the commissioner. And then the warden is or his designee shall have the authority to enforce the uniform. So if these guys were wearing those on their uniforms and their warden didn't do anything about it, the warden is also in trouble. So it'll filter down. Now, both these guys that we're talking about that were wearing these patches, allegedly, you said, I've dealt with too many legal issues. That's why when I was reading this thing, I'm like, I was finding things that was, my take on these lawyers, they didn't do due diligence, as Lauren said. They didn't ask somebody who actually knows what an Odinist is. There's so many things wrong. And this thing with the patches, Indiana, like I said, says the same thing. If it's not authorized by the commissioner and enforced by your warden, it won't be on the uniforms. And they said they were bringing their phones in and taking pictures, but they don't have them. Excuse me. Basically, my take on those lawyers, the defense lawyers, they're irresponsible. They are totally irresponsible because what they're doing is they're tarring and feathering an entire religion and saying, oh, this is an Odinist, it's a cult. Anybody who wears Thor's hammer is obviously an Odinist. I'm not an Odinist. I like Thor myself, not Marvel's Thor, although he's nice to look at. But but it's they just, and they didn't do due diligence. Like Lauren was talking about the runes, and she says, the hanged man with the first rune of the alphabet is Fehu. But in the memorandum, they quote a different one because one F has the straight line up and down, but then the arms can either go up or they can go down. They quoted it as being Anzus, and they said, well, you've got the one thing that says, and it automatically means hail, and the other one is attributed to the god Odin, so it's Hail Odin is what they were saying. Well, the first one they talked about, they used the terminology from the Younger Futhark, which is one of the alphabets, and it has more letters than one I would use, which is the Elder. And if they'd read a little further, they would have found out that it means hail stone, not hail as in hi, how are you? They didn't do due diligence. They looked, and to me, one of the discussions they were using, they got it straight out of Wikipedia. So I'm thinking somebody in the office looked it up on Wikipedia and then, that's gospel. Let's use that. And it tars and feathers all heathens. And it's poor information. It's poor work on the defense lawyer's part. The parts about who's what, I don't care about that. But when I look at what it impacts on my religion, yeah, I have a problem with the way they are showing us. And they're doing it for purity, unadulterated sensationalism. That's the only reason that they're pushing it so hard.
And I want to add into here that, even small things, like there are multiple court cases either just decided or pending right now. I know Segram versus New York, and then there's another one that just got reopened in Texas that I can't remember, about that are specific cases brought by correctional officers trying to wear symbols of their faith. So the fact of the matter is, this is something that usually takes a court order to happen.
Yeah.
And there's, like I said, I don't know of any in Indiana, but there are cases in Arkansas, cases in Texas, and then of course Segram versus New York right now that just was decided in favor of the plaintiff.
Well, it's like with me, when I'm out in public, I'll wear my Thor's hammer. Yeah, it's probably under my shirt or something, but I'll wear it. When I worked at the facility, I never wore it because I had to go through a metal detector, and that was just one last thing that I needed to have detected. It was just one last piece of metal that I didn't need to be wearing. So I did not wear my Thor's hammer at work. What anybody knew if they were talking with me, is they would have me listed as, oh, she's pagan friendly, which I was. More so than they thought, but I was. But, now if I go out and I wear my Thor's hammer, here in Georgia, it's not so bad, but in some other states, I'd make sure it was hidden. I'd wear it still, but it would have to stay under my shirt.
And I'm very blessed. I'm blessed that I have a job, even though I live in Arkansas. I'm blessed that I have a job where I have very supportive coworkers. But it is a real thing for us. And because of Odinist, there are a lot of people who can't go to their jobs and wear hammers, and this is just making it worse. The fear of people being outed or having this used against them in child custody cases. I mean, all this is doing is making life worse for the roughly 50 to 60,000 people in the United States who fall under that heathenry umbrella.
I'm sorry you guys are dealing with this on top of everything. I want to go back to the patches because I want to delve into one aspect. And I think, honestly, it's going to be a situation where the answer may just be we don't know at this point because there's limited information from one filing. But with those patches, would those strike you both as, you mentioned seeing them all over the place? Would they strike you as particularly nefarious or sided with the more Odinist or a Satru kind of racist type of thing, or no, just more kind of down the middle? Yeah. What I would associate that with, if I saw it, would be with someone who served as a first responder or a member of the military, a veteran. That's what in Odin we trust. Those tend to be people who very highly identify with the warrior aspect of Odin. Mm-hmm. And those people tend to be, which another program our organization is very heavily involved with, is working with our military as well as our veterans. And so, having worked with that population quite a bit, I'm a on-call chaplain for the Veterans Hospital here locally. That is very common. I would say it's not, and people who are veterans are like any other population. They span the political spectrum. So to me, it says, I am someone who identifies with the warrior aspect of a particular god. Or the other part of it is I'm annoyed at, especially the in Odin we trust. That sometimes is just, I'm really annoyed with people who are trying to push their Christianity on me and I'm trying to push back. That's another part of it, is people just kind of being a little, people are just trying to be, they're trying to be a little persnickety. Yes. I can understand that. Especially, it's there is a bit of sarcasm there. Okay, we got in God we trust a lot, but maybe we trust in Odin instead.
It reminds me of my ex-husband was in military intelligence, and he had a shirt that said, in God we trust, all others we monitor. It's very similar to that kind of thought process, but I wouldn't immediately jump and say, I would think they were a cop or a firefighter or a military veteran. I wouldn't, like I said, that's as someone who goes to events across the spectrum, I would kind of expect it to be any of those.
And I just want to talk about one of the underlying kind of thrusts of, I think, the memorandum, for lack of a better word, is sort of, I think that a lot of people found very interesting, but also maybe somewhat confusing is the kind of linkage of what the defense is calling a group of child murderers, essentially, or people who should have been looked into more as possible child murderers, who are linked in with quote unquote Odinist beliefs, to prison guards who may be wearing patches that indicate some belief in Odin as a god. And so this long-winded question is basically like the, from what you both have seen with more of the Odinist side, the white supremacist side that you kind of mentioned, using more gang tactics, does that sound like a realistic kind of pipeline gang as far as having that level of interconnectedness? You guys are not from Indiana, but to give you a sense, these Westville prison is up in like the northern reach of the state, and Delphi is not that far. It's quite far away, so we're not talking about like the same geographic area either here. That's not really a question. It's just like, does that sound like an Odinist gang as far as you guys have maybe interacted with or seen as far as the kind of bad white supremacist side of things?
With the Odinists, they're just like any other gang. They're into the drugs and on the outside, they do all kinds of stuff on the outside, but within the prison system, it's mostly getting contraband brought in, and they will subvert an officer just as quick as they will another inmate. So yeah, they do get involved in that. It's not as prevalent sometimes, it seems. Most of the officers that are being, as I put it, brought to the dark side, it's done by not necessarily white gangs or whites, what they're a gang that's not calling themselves Odinist. But it's more the MS-13, the Las Arenas, and a lot of the Bloods, the Crips, and their little subgroups that they basically turn them, is what they're doing. It's almost like vampiric turn. They turn them because officer, the one thing you don't do is you don't discuss your personal life with inmates. Well, officers do sometimes. And an inmate will pick up on that, and then the word will get out, and somebody will say, well, I hear you're having some financial troubles. If you do this for me, I'll make sure. I was 24 years in the department, and we probably lost overall, I was at 4 different facilities, and we probably lost 70, 80 officers who were bringing in contraband and cell phones, drugs. Here in Georgia, we're not smoking. Tobacco's a big, product. We had one lieutenant. She was bringing in a carton of cigarettes, and she was selling each cigarette for $8. I think they're going for now. When I was in, it was only $5. So inflation has got to it. But yeah, it's what you find on the outside, you'll find it on the inside. It's think of a prison as a small microcosm of society. You name it, we've got it.
But I will say something that I find different, and especially if you have, is the identifying as Asatru versus Odinist. I don't know many Odinists that would identify as Asatru and vice versa. And part of this is because the major Asatru groups in the U.S. Tend to have a very anti-prisoner mentality. And that comes from some of the Norse sagas, where you essentially had people that were, when they committed their crimes, they were kicked out of society because they didn't have the prisons that we do. So they see prisons as part of that. And in fact, I'll be honest, our organization used to believe that way up until about 20 years ago. So I would say that that is also having someone who identifies as Asatru, who may or may not be affiliated with one of the bigger racist, folkish organizations, then be involved with this Odinist stuff. It doesn't logically make sense to me. Is it possible? Absolutely. Is it probable? Not in my experience. I have been heathen for 20 years. I have been involved in communications and public relations for heathenry for the past 10. So I have never experienced that in the past 10 years. And having asked other people who've been involved with stuff, I've never met someone who knows of that crossover between the now 30 years ago, absolutely. But now it is much more segregated because of these ideas about prisoners.
Yes.
That makes sense. And it sounds like, again, to use the Christian analogy, because I think that's helpful for folks who may not be familiar here. But that's like kind of being like, okay, these people are all connected, and you find out one's Catholic, one's Lutheran, one's Methodist. And you're like, maybe.
Or I think a better way to put it would be one's Catholic, one's Catholic, one's Baptist, and one's Mormon. Like that disparate. And none of them actually recognize, and a lot of them don't recognize the other one as even
Christian,
a member of their faith. Yeah, because I know a lot of Odinist and folkish Asatru don't believe that we're actually heathen. They don't believe we're actually a part of the faith.
Right.
So yeah, to me, it's much more disparate than that. But regardless, that's where I struggle, because to me, the biggest red flag in all of this is you have a gentleman who is actively recruiting to try to form an Asatru group where he lives, and not an Odinist group, but Asatru, Asatru is a religious group. They may have beliefs I find abhorrent, but for the most part, they are religious, versus Odinism, which is not. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then you add like the sacrificial element, and from both sides, from my experience, I do live in Arkansas. In fact, there is a great documentary called A Mother Turns to Hate by NBC Out on YouTube that is about an Odinist that lives 30 minutes from me. Named who was arrested in Charlottesville. So I think that, one of the things with this is we have to look at it from the sense of why. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me to do this. They would do that to their enemy. They might do it as part of like a gang conflict, but it doesn't make sense to me as someone, like I said, who has been around all of this. Children are always seen as very innocent. And if you have someone who is Asatru, who is religious, their hope is always, they're trying to, and I don't want to quote it here, but if you've ever heard of David Lane's 14 words, the end of it it's all about white children specifically. So I struggle. And here's the thing. I absolutely believe if this was done by an Odinist gang type thing, it's horrifying and it's terrible, but it was a gang murder. And it just proves what I have said consistently as people have talked to me. Hate absolutely taints everything it touches. And whether that is going to be, if the small chance that this is somehow related, or the fact that this is the defensive strategy to try to get this person not to be convicted, it's still hate involved. It's still damaging a chance for justice. It's damaging all of these people who are not full of hate. And it's a very hard thing to see that once again, it's about hate. It's not, at the end of the day, what they do is about hate. It is about the idea that they need to be the only person and only their beliefs matter, and only their beliefs should exist. And I guess that's not me, and that's not really what I believe, but I certainly hope that the prosecution is able to reach out to experts and hopefully debunk some of this, because it is disturbing to read this and see this representation, and to know from, because Jo and I've both been involved for a very long time, to know that a lot of these are just gross misrepresentations of all of these faiths. Because even being an Odinist does not mean you're a murderer. You might be a crappy person. You might be in a gang. You might be a racist and a bigot, but that doesn't automatically make you a murderer any more than anything else. And I feel like, are we going to blame video games next? I feel like where we're going at this point.
Again.
My childhood all over. Yeah, it's my childhood all over again.
I want to ask you both, it's a long document. Are there any other portions of it that stood out to you as problematic or containing falsehoods, or even just perhaps that you just wanted to clarify or expand upon?
But one thing I did want to clarify is Richard Allen is being held at Westville Correctional Facility. Yeah, I know where it's at. I actually am in communication with an inmate there who identifies as an Odinist, but he wants to be be inclusive. So I'm going to push him in the right direction. Richard Allen has not been convicted. He's still sitting in, basically, he is technically in jail. He's there for his own safekeeping, and because his bail is so high, he was considered a flight risk. Having worked in close security facilities, I know for a fact we've had to house inmates from jails before because of something, very touchy for the community. He's in protective custody, which means he's in a single man cell. He can see his wife, but when he sees her, there's no other visitors, there's no other inmates in the visitation area except him and his wife. There was a thing in here about complaining about the officers could hear everything that was being said. Well, yeah, it's quiet because there's not going to be a lot of other distracting noise, but there has to be an officer in there with them the whole time to make sure that she doesn't pass him contraband or he passes her or something like that. That's the reason for an officer being present. The one thing I did see, and it's probably a quibbly thing, it's the use of the camera. We use cameras in there to document. We don't wear body cams like the police do. So a lot of times when there's something going on, we have camcorders, and there's usually a designated person who's told to run, go get the camcorder if something's going on. Like if there's a fight on the yard, one of the officers has to run, get the camera, and it's already being handed out a window to him when they get there, so they can quick run back and take whatever pictures. They were complaining about that they were being videotaped, and they videotape everything. Now, normally we don't videotape lawyer clients, but that's here in Georgia. Indiana, I don't know if they do or not, whether they do or not, but it's that lawyer client privilege thing that we abide. There's somebody in the area, not necessarily staring right at it, but there's an officer there to watch over whatever's going on. And they're making out like with the two officers that they do reference, the ones who had the patches on, that they're always there. Well, if they refer to them as transport officers, and they're both sergeants, which you have to be a sergeant to be a transport officer. You're the lead transport. They can have a non-sergeant with them, but a sergeant's in charge of that detail. And normally they do put two sergeants together. Because he's at Westville for safekeeping, and they probably work the area a lot, that's probably why they see those two sergeants all the time. They're probably tasked with watching over him, because they're probably the ones that also take him back down to Delphi, to the courthouse down there, and they're going to be transporting him back and forth. So what they're doing is legitimate procedure. It's just the defense attorneys are trying to twist it so that it's, they're doing it because they are Odinists, Odinites. I love that one. And that they, are doing it just to keep an eye on him to see what he's saying. Because they make a big deal about, he always asks his wife, asks people, how's my wife? How's she doing? How's she doing when the lawyers come in? Like he's trying to get them to think that there's going to be something happening to his family if he talks. Half the time, if you're an officer that's on that detail, you just want to get that detail over with. You're not looking for little minutia, you do keep an eye, because you can't allow escapes. You've got to keep an eye on them. I've sat details where I was watching, they used to pick me for some reason. I got to watch the Islamic services. And yes, I had a camera. We would record them because it was speaking in Arabic. And we'd have somebody come down from the department. They would translate for it. And then what they were doing was they were just praying. That's all they were doing. There was nothing major going on. So they're following procedure, and the defense attorneys are trying to conflate it into something that's totally out of the realm, that it's a conspiracy, because if it's a conspiracy, the warden's in on it, the sheriff's in on it, which means they're both Odinists too. You start going down, they're just doing their job. They're transport officers. They're transporting the inmate. That's what they do, and they being sergeants and being out in the community, I don't see them wearing those patches on that uniform because one, their lieutenant sees it. He'll want to know what's going on. The warden sees it, and they said, oh, well, they ripped it off after a certain date. I don't think that's what was on there at all. It was something else, or they may have had it on some of their personal gear. But you can't, an officer, especially a sergeant who's been with the department any length of time, will know you don't wear something unauthorized on a uniform, no matter what your religion.
I have a couple of things I want to debunk from the information that they have in here about Odinism, and what they're really talking about with Mr. Holder is also true. So first of all, there's all this talk about tree branches and this tree motif. Well, trees are sacred in our religion. In fact, my organization just published, we do a quarterly journal. In fact, our last issue was about the sacredness of trees in our religion. One of the main parts of our cosmology is the giant tree Yggdrasil, which connects all of the realms of the world. And that's where Odin hung to gain the wisdom of written language. So, they're talking about all these things with like tree branches and that kind of stuff. That's completely normal. Like that is literally the logo of our organization, right? That I wear is a tree with an apple and different colored leaves to represent our members and the branches to respect the different branches of heathenry. Like that's just normal. I mean, that's nothing unusual. So then he talks about the horns being worn. And then, okay, now we're starting to conflate Celtic mythology into Norse mythology, because that's a Celtic thing. And also runes. So one thing, people who aren't familiar with runes are straight lines. And I used to be on a rune identification little subreddit on Reddit. And every other day, someone would come in and show this picture of something they saw in a tree or on the ground. And I like to take walks at lunch at work. And if I do that, I can often see something. I can see a rune in anything because it's straight lines. And any kind of scuffle, fight, broken branches, they get tossed on top of each other. People can see runes in everything. It kind of reminds me of the people who see Jesus in everything. It's kind of very similar. And having seen the pictures that are out there, and I can't validate if they're correct or not, but the ones that were shown on Court TV that you were talking about on the last episode I listened that was out with the Q&A, they're curved lines. Runes are not curved. They're straight. And so I really struggle looking at those and going, I guess if you squint your eyes, it kind of looks like one of those, maybe if runes were a Rorschach test, but I'm confused. And the post of the half-dead woman, that is one of our goddesses, Hel. She is the keeper of the underworld. She is where we go to rest after we die. And to us, hell is a good place. Hel, not two L's. It's where we go to rest and revive and be reunited with our beloved dead. There's nothing. And if to see a picture of it with no, I guess, framework, it's creepy. But the fact of the matter is, Hel is a beloved goddess in our religion. She is very beloved because she is the one where our beloved dead are. She is the one who provides us rest and respite. And once again, a lot of the stuff they're trying to turn into creepy stuff, if they picked up a single book on Norse mythology, would be very easily explained. And that, it's very hurtful to see, half dead woman. And then they talk about a lot of Gothic influence. Okay, so the most popular images we have of the Norse gods and goddesses were inspired by the Wagnerian operas. And most of the paintings that we have that people are in public domain, so they get used a lot, are from the Victorian era, inspired Wagnerian operas. So of course they're going to be Gothic inspired or Victorian inspired, because that's what's in the public domain. And that's what people use when they're trying to publish books, because not a lot of us have a lot of money. You're talking about books that might sell 5,000 copies if it's a best-selling heathen book. So, a lot, like I said, I feel like if they had literally picked up the phone and called my organization, or called the SPLC or the ADL even, or any of the academics that actually specialize in our religion and had a 30-minute conversation, you know what? They still probably could have worked this Odinist idea as a gang and not ended up defaming an entire religion with their filing. They would have actually probably had a better defense if they had just spoken, because they would have called me and said, okay, great, let me put you in contact with Jo Hunding. She's the director of our prison in-reach services. She would be happy to help you. Or let me get you in charge. Yeah, I'm friends with Jennifer Snook. I've known her for years and years. Why don't I get you in charge of Jennifer Snook? Jennifer is an academic. She's a sociologist. She wrote a book called American Heathens, which is, a published, recognized academic book on this topic. Jennifer would be happy, could give you some great information. Let me get you in contact with Jefferson Calico. He's another academic. He wrote Being Viking. Let me get you in touch with Diana Paxson. She is a published author who is an expert in the runes. We could have literally given them everything they needed to put together a good, solid presentation where they could have focused on the gang aspect and not a satanic panic socialized. And even now, the news stations aren't reaching out to us. They're reaching out. I love Jefferson Calico. He is an amazing academic, but he's not heathen. And when they reach out to him, they're not getting the full picture. And I can't imagine someone saying, well, the Virgin Mary told me to go commit this murder, and they don't reach out to the Catholic Church.
Right. And I also feel like if the roles were reversed and Catholicism was a small minority religion, and people were saying, well, they've got a guy hanging on a cross in their house, that's pretty creepy. We can through different lenses, that's a sacred object for people who are Catholic, but if it's rather a sacred image, but if you're looking at it from the lens of how creepy is this, then I think there's a lot to go around in religion, right? It's just because something's different than what we're used to doesn't mean it's creepy or bad or inherently suspicious. It should be just something that, is somebody's belief. And if there's other activity that's creepy, well, let's not put that on the whole religion, right?
Let's be honest, from a non-Christian perspective, the idea of eating and drinking your God's blood and flesh is pretty creepy.
It's hard.
But most people are just like, oh, that's just communion, And I think that is important to look at the lens of, what we see here. We're also not literalist. We're not mythical literalists. We see these stories mostly because these stories were written down by Christians way after Christianization. So what we see these stories they're ways for us to understand our gods. They're ways for us to be inspired, but none of us take these things seriously. So for the story of Odin hanging on the tree, we see that not as a literal, you should go hang yourself on a tree to get a skill. We see that as a story of self-sacrifice, of determination and dedication to achieve something great. And that's what we take from that, not, violence in the same, and I would argue one of the things our religion definitely teaches is moderation. So we often struggle with that idea where people think that we're hardcore and violent and all this. And most of us are, I am a computer programmer. My hobbies are making jewelry, and I have 3 little dogs. I volunteer. I mean, in fact, one of the greatest compliments someone ever gave me was what a great Christian I was. And I knew from their lens, they were giving me the best compliment they knew how to give me. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not. I own a house. I mow my yard. I have a garden. I like to cook. I mean, I am no different than any of the rest of you. I just have a different religion. And the more people can understand that, people who believe in pagan faiths or other faiths are like them. We just believe a little differently, but the better things are. And I think that is just really the thing I hope. If you take nothing away from this, please take away that most of us are just like you. We have the same dreams, desires. We want our kids to live in a better world. We all hate the word moist. No, we all have sports teams we root for. We all, get annoyed when we all hate paying bills. I mean, there's so many things we have in common with our neighbors. And I'm just hoping if you take one thing away from this, just know that most people you see wearing a Thor's hammer or a Volknot are just, if you got to know them, you would realize that they are literally just like you with a difference in who they worship.
That is so well said. And thank you so much, Lauren and Jo. I just want to thank both of you for coming on the show and clearing some of this up and speaking to your faith and what it means to you and what it means. And hopefully this will kind of clear some things up for a lot of people who may have only really interacted with it through this case and maybe broaden all of our lenses a little bit. Before we go, is there anything I didn't ask you about? Well, actually, let me ask Kevin first. Did I forget anything?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I did. I'm like, he's keeping score. I know it. For both of you, is there anything we didn't ask you that you wanted to say, or you wanted to just kind of have be, your concluding statement almost?
Well, for me, I'm like Lauren. I'm a veteran. I'm a Navy veteran. Went from one military organization to the quasi-military, the prison systems. And I retired from there, got kids, got grandkids, I've got dogs, I've got cats, I've got a mortgage. I just like her, I garden, I make jewelry, I can stuff. Most of the people I know that follow the heathen faith may not follow, exactly the way I do it. But to me, that's the joy in the diversity, is watching how someone else is, I never thought of that. That's an interesting way to do that. But we're just regular people. We just, I've got friends and I've got one friend who's in IT, and he's part of my kindred. I belong to a kindred also. We've got, not a big group. There's just a few of us. Actually, there's probably about 10 maybe. And every single one does something different, but we're all basically the same. We have our regular lives, we pay bills, we, get up in the morning, glad that we're not pushing up daisies and, that sort of, we're just normal, everyday people who just happen to believe in a different style of faith. That's the only difference, is that we believe in a polytheistic rather than a monotheistic. But do we want to go out and, pillage and burn and do all that stuff? I have had those thoughts occasionally, but it's all they were, was just thoughts. And cooler minds prevailed and convinced me that was wrong. But, we wouldn't do something like that. We just, no more than we would sacrifice a child. Because, if any of us have children, we bend over backwards to help our children and our grandchildren. So we're just like everybody else. And the way the defense lawyers are portraying us is not the way we really are.
I will freely admit I did engage in some pillaging this year at Parliament of World Religions. We were next to the friars, so I did go pillage their candy bowl a few times. I have to be honest.
This is very strange to me as an Irish person to hear about you guys pillaging. No, I'm just
yeah. I even went and said, hey guys, I'm going to come pillage you guys. And we actually entered into a great relationship with them at Parliament of World Religions because my kindred brother asked their friars, he kept asking them, French friars, and so it became a really great time. And that's the thing, like we get along, like we were at Parliament of Religions. We had a great time with the Catholics, the Sikhs, the Muslims, everyone. And we did panels with them. And, it was a wonderful time. But I will say, if people are curious to really know what we do believe and want more in-depth information, they can go to our website. It's The Troth, TheTroth.org. And they can go there, learn more about us. You can see, we have a full section. It's called Learn at the very top. You can click that. It has all the information, most of it written by my kindred brother, Ben. I'll brag on him for a minute. And also our communication director, Ben, who are two different people. And you can really come in and look and see what we believe. You can kind of understand that how similar what we believe is to so many other faiths. And I know this because a lot of people in our religion are in interfaith families and share the same values as their Christian or Jewish or whatever spouse. So, please, if you'd like to learn more, please do so, because we love to share who we are with people so there's less misinformation.
That's amazing. You guys have both been amazing guests, and we just want to thank you so much for your time and your insight. And just this has been a delightful conversation. So we just really appreciate you guys coming on.
Well, thank you for letting us come on. We really appreciate it. And I do have one last little thing that where you have hate, it begins with ignorance, because people tend to hate what they don't understand. And that is psychology 101. Trust me. I had it beat into my head. The more the people can come, ask, when they get on the website, they'll find my email address. I answer questions just as quickly, and I don't, I'll write to people. I like snail mail myself. Like I said, I'm a dinosaur. But the more we can get people informed, the more they can look at something and say, oh, no, they wouldn't do that. That's not what they do. Because they have concrete, I will say evidence, but proof that, they've talked with somebody, and it would just make them, it just makes the world a much easier place to get along in when you understand other people.
And I would also say it's Pagan Pride season. So if you have a local Pagan Pride coming up, please go out and check it out. I know some have already passed, but for instance, I'm going to be speaking at Tulsa Pagan Pride next month. And so please come and check it out. Meet your local pagans. See that we're just a bunch of people with like way too much free time and who have a way too high affinity for silver jewelry. That's all you'll learn is we really like jewelry. But beyond that, please come meet your local pagans and get to know us, because we are just like you, just, like I said, a different faith and a really large love for rocks and shiny things. But
yes.
Love it.
Loot.
Woo.
We want to sincerely thank Lauren and Jo for coming on our show to discuss their faith. And thanks to The Troth for making that happen.
We'll include links to The Troth, its statement on the Delphi case, along with the Heathen History Podcast. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.